Usually when we think about looking through a window, we expect the glass to be, well, perfectly clear. Like we want to see the trees outside exactly as they are.
Right, you just want the pure view, unobstructed.
Exactly.
Right.
But imagine if every single window you ever look through subtly changed the colors of the leaves. Like one window makes everything a little warmer, a little more golden,
Oh, I see where you're going with this.
and then another window makes everything incredibly sharp, almost glaringly bright. And maybe another is a bit smudged, but it's small enough that you can actually carry it in your pocket.
Well, in that scenario, you aren't just seeing the tree anymore. You're seeing the tree filtered through the specific chemistry and shape of that glass. The window itself becomes, a mandatory part of the view.
And that is just a brilliant way to understand what has happened to the music we've all been listening to for the last century. We like to think we are just listening to our favorite artist, but we're actually listening to the window, the physical format itself.
It's so true. The medium really is the message, or in this case, the music.
Yeah. So today's deep dive takes us through a truly fascinating July 2025 column from Monumental Movement Records. It's titled, From the Sound of the Needle to Streaming, Sound Lives On Beyond Eras.
And it's a rigorous piece of analysis, really, because it completely dismantles this idea we have that a song is a fixed, objective thing. I mean, this isn't just a nostalgic look back at flipping records or winding up tapes with a pencil.
Which we've all done, by the way.
Oh, for sure. But it explores the literal physics of these formats, like how the microscopic grooves of a record or the magnetic dust on a tape dictated exactly what frequencies could actually survive the journey to your eardrums.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah.
Because I promise you, by the end of this deep dive, you will never listen to your favorite album the exact same way again. We're going to explore how the constraints of physical media didn't just, play the music.
Right, they actively shaped how music was created.
Exactly, all the way up to the invisible, three-dimensional architecture of spatial audio today.
So, to understand our modern obsession with flawless sound, we have to start with the beautiful flaws of our analog past.
We really do.
For decades, music required physical friction. You literally had to drag a rock through a trench. Let's start with the undisputed heavyweight, vinyl.
Yeah, the quintessential analog format. I mean, the MMR column notes roughly 3 billion units sold globally, peaking in the 1970s. But the science of the LP, the long-playing record, is where things get really illuminating.
Okay, break that down for us. What's the science?
Well, theoretically, vinyl can handle a frequency response from about 20 hertz up to 20 kilohertz.
Okay.
To put that in perspective for human hearing, 20 hertz is that deep physical rumble of a bass drum, the kind you feel in your chest.
Oh, yeah, the chest thumping bass.
Exactly. And 20 kilohertz is the absolute highest shimmering crash of a cymbal right at the edge of what a young, healthy human ear can even detect. But I noticed you used the word theoretically there because pulling those extremes out of a piece of spinning PVC plastic isn't exactly a perfect science, is it?
No, far from it. The column digs into the spectrogram details. A spectrogram is basically a visual map of sound.
Right.
When you look at vinyl on a spectrogram, you see incredibly rich, saturated low frequencies. But the problem is purely mechanical. You have a diamond stylus physically dragging through microscopic canyons.
Canyons of plastic.
Right. And you're dealing with rotation unevenness. So microscopic fluctuations in how fast the platter actually spins. Plus, you have variations in needle pressure.
So the needle is just bouncing all over the place on a microscopic level.
Exactly. As that needle violently vibrates back and forth to recreate high frequencies, basically anything above 15 kilohertz, it physically struggles to track those tight microscopic waves.
Wait, so the needle just sort of gives up. It physically can't wiggle fast enough.
It's more that it rounds off the sharpest edges of those tiny grooves. The physical limitation causes a smooth roll-off of high frequencies. They gently fade out rather than, piercing through.
Wow.
Plus, you have the inescapable friction of the needle against the plastic itself, which creates the pops, the crackles, and that subtle bed of static.
But here's the wild part. A lot of us don't hear those physical failures as errors.
Yeah.
I like to think of vinyl's sound profile as being almost like a live acoustic instrument.
That's a really interesting way to look at it.
Yeah, like if you go see a cellist play in a small room, you hear their fingers squeaking as they slide on the strings, you hear them breathing, you wouldn't call those errors in the performance, right? They are the flavor of the performance.
Right, they add texture.
Exactly. With vinyl, the natural friction and that gentle physical softening of the piercing high notes create a sound that is universally described as warm.
We interpret physical limitation as aesthetically pleasing. I mean, our brains just accept that friction as a humanizing element. But while we loved the warmth, that physical friction was entirely tethered to the living room.
Yeah, you couldn't exactly take a turntable on a morning jog.
Definitely not. The needle would just destroy the groove. And that fundamental human desire to share music, to take it outside, it created a massive technological pivot. Absolute acoustic fidelity suddenly found itself competing against portability.
Which brings us to the era of the mixtape, the cassette. And the sheer dominance of this format is wild to think about. Over 5 billion units sold. We traded a giant vinyl disc for a tiny plastic rectangle filled with magnetic ribbon.
We really did. But the scientific trade-off was incredibly steep.
It was a brutal compromise, wasn't it?
It was. Cassette tape is essentially just rust. Literally iron oxide particles glued to a strip of plastic dragging across an electromagnetic head. It's honestly a miracle it produces recognizable music at all.
That is kind of terrifying when you put it like that, just rust and plastic.
Right. And if vinyl gave us that theoretical 20 to 20,000 hertz spectrum, the spectrogram of a cassette shows a real struggle. Standard, normal bias tapes physically maxed out around 12 kilohertz.
Oh, wow. So you lose a huge chunk at the high end.
Exactly. Now, the really expensive metal tapes might push to 18 kilohertz, but the high frequencies experienced a severe, sudden cliff. They didn't gently roll off like vinyl. They basically crashed.
And it wasn't just the high frequencies vanishing. It was the noise that replaced them. Tape hiss.
Yeah.
I remember playing cassettes in my dad's car, and, in the quiet parts of songs, it sounded like a distant highway.
Yeah, that's the inherent noise of the magnetic particles themselves passing over the tape head. The article notes this constant, inescapable hiss sits right across the upper frequencies at around negative 50 decibels.
Which is pretty loud.
It's loud enough that you simply cannot ignore it.
So the industry tried to Band-Aid it, right?
Yeah.
I mean, my old stereo had that button for Dolby noise reduction to try and kill the hiss.
Yes. Dolby noise reduction was a brilliant but highly destructive workaround. It worked by physically altering the audio during the recording process.
How so?
Well, it artificially boosted the volume of the high frequencies on the tape so they were significantly louder than the tape hiss. Then, when you press the Dolby button during playback, the stereo would artificially lower those high frequencies back to normal.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, pushing the hiss down into silence along with them.
That's actually genius. It's like hiding the dust under a really loud rug and then, I don't know, shrinking the rug.
Yeah.
But it changed the sound, didn't it?
It smoothed things out, yes, but as the source points out, it left the audio with a very distinct, round, slightly muffled tone. The extreme airy highs were just collateral damage in the war against tape hiss.
Wow, collateral damage.
Yeah, and this had a massive impact on how music was actually produced in the 80s and 90s.
Yeah.
Producers knew their songs were destined for a muffled cassette.
So they changed how they recorded.
Exactly. They would mix tracks in the studio to be incredibly bright and punchy, artificially boosting the treble just so the song would survive the translation to tape.
So what does this all mean? We have a format that demonstrably sounded worse than vinyl. It was muffled, it hissed like a leaky tire, and it could literally get tangled and eaten by your car's stereo. Why did we universally accept worse sound for 2 decades?
Well, because of the paradigm shift driven by what the article calls the Walkman effect. For the first time in human history, you could soundtrack your own life.
Right, the world became your movie.
Exactly. The cassette offered privacy and mobility. You could put on headphones and create an isolated world on a crowded bus. The emotional value of having your favorite song with you anywhere you went vastly outweighed the acoustic loss of those high frequencies.
But human nature being what it is, once we conquered portability, we immediately wanted our high fidelity back. We hated the tape hiss. We hated having to rewind. We wanted the perfect window again.
We always want it all.
We really do. And that desire birthed the digital revolution. We entered the era of the CD, the compact disc, where we finally achieved clinical perfection, but maybe lost a tiny bit of our analog souls in the process.
The CD is still the undisputed king of physical media sales. The column puts it at over 30 billion units sold. 30 billion. And scientifically, it was a complete paradigm shift.
The more friction, right?
Right. Instead of a needle dragging through a groove or rusty tape dragging over a magnet, we moved to non-contact reading. A laser reads microscopic pits on a reflective disk, translating them into pure binary code, ones and zeros.
So all the physical wear and tear, the friction that caused the pops and the hiss is just gone overnight.
Completely eradicated, and the specifications were rigid, a 44.1 kilohertz sampling rate.
Wait, hold on. Let me stop you there. 44,100 times a second. Why that specific random number? Why not just an even 50,000? Yep.
It's a great question. It actually comes down to a mathematical principle called the Nyquist-Shannon sampling theorem. Basically, to perfectly recreate a sound wave digitally, your sampling rate has to be slightly more than double the highest frequency you want to capture.
Okay, and human hearing tops out at 20 kilohertz.
Exactly. Since the limit is 20 kilohertz, double that is 40 kilohertz. They added a little bit of a buffer for the anti-aliasing filters to work smoothly, landing precisely at 44.1 kilohertz.
Fascinating.
Yeah, this guaranteed that the digital system takes enough snapshots of the audio wave to perfectly reconstruct a flat frequency response from 20 hertz all the way up to 20 kilohertz.
So no smooth roll-off like vinyl, no sudden drop-off like a cassette.
Just absolute uncolored reproduction. The noise floor, again, the baseline level of background noise in the format drops effectively to zero.
Which completely changes the dynamic range.
It does. This means artists could use massive dynamic range. A song could go from a whisper-quiet acoustic guitar to a sudden explosive drum crash, and the CD handled it flawlessly without distorting.
That sounds like the dream.
It was. But what's fascinating here is that this flawless clarity, this absolute clinical perfection, actually alienated a huge portion of listeners.
Oh, it's the too clear window. You suddenly see every smudge on the tree leaves outside.
That's a great way to put it, yeah. When you remove all the random noise, the gentle distortion, and the natural roll-off of high frequencies, the sound can feel sterile and harsh to an ear that spent decades training on analog warmth.
Every mistake a musician made in the studio was suddenly glaringly obvious.
Yes. The CD gave listeners exactly the raw data that was recorded, and it turned out a lot of people actually preferred the physical interpretation, the gentle softening of the vinyl.
But despite the perfect sound, CDs still had a physical footprint.
Yeah.
They were relatively large, they scratched easily, and man, if you tried to jog with a Discman before they invented anti-skip memory, it was a nightmare.
Total nightmare.
So the tech industry tried one more massive physical experiment before invisible streaming took over completely. And this was fascinating because it felt like a glimpse of the future. But it ended up as a localized phenomenon, the mini disc.
Ah, the MD. This format sold tens of millions of units, heavily concentrated in Japan during the late 90s and early 2000s. It never quite dethroned the CD globally, and today it's essentially extinct.
But the tech was important.
Very. The technology inside it really set the stage for how we consume audio today.
So why did it fail to take over the world when it was smaller than a CD, it didn't skip, and you could record your own mixes on it?
It comes down to the complex science of data compression. A standard CD holds a massive amount of data. To shrink an album down onto a tiny mini disc, engineers had to invent an algorithm called HRAS.
Okay, H-ray.
Right. It still targeted that magical 20 hertz to 20 kilohertz range, but it simply didn't have the storage space for all those ones and zeros. So it used perceptual coding. The algorithm literally analyzed the music on the fly and deleted sounds it calculated your human brain wouldn't notice anyway.
Wait, really? So it's a psychological trick as much as a digital one. It's just guessing what my ears are ignoring.
Fundamentally, yes. If a loud drum beat hits at the exact same millisecond as a quiet triangle ping, your brain physically can't process the triangle. It's called auditory masking.
Wow.
So the HRAC algorithm just deletes the triangle data to save space, but it also had to make hard cuts, forcing the high frequencies to cut off early, around 17 to 18 kilohertz.
Okay, let me try a visual analogy here. If a CD is a massive, uncompressed raw photograph straight from a professional camera, the mini disc was a highly compressed JPEG.
That's a perfect comparison.
Like, it looks great at a glance. If you're just casually looking at it on your phone, you probably won't notice a difference. But if you really zoom in on a JPEG, the edges are blurry. Tiny details in the shadows are just blocked out into solid pixels.
That captures the effect perfectly. In fact, the MMR column notes a very specific acoustic penalty for this compression. It caused transient components to blur.
Transient components.
Yeah. A transient is the short, sharp initial burst of a sound, like the sharp crack of a snare drum, or the very first hard pluck of a guitar string. On a CD, that transient is razor sharp.
Because it has all the data.
Right. On an MD, the compression algorithm physically struggles to process that sudden explosive burst of complex data fast enough. So the attack of the sound gets slightly smeared across time.
Oh, so it loses its punch.
It loses its immediate punch, exactly. It sounded clear, but it lacked the absolute depth and speed of a CD.
So we have this incredible journey of physical constraints. The warm physical friction of vinyl, the portable hissy convenience of cassettes, the clinical digital perfection of CDs, and the highly compressed, miniaturized experiment of the mini disc.
It's quite a timeline.
It is, but with CDs perfecting digital audio and compression algorithms getting smarter, the transition to pure digital data streaming was just inevitable. No physical format at all. Just invisible data beamed from a server farm directly to your wireless earbuds.
And that dematerialization of music brings us to the modern fork in the road. With streaming effectively neutralizing the mainstream physical market, the industry has dramatically bifurcated. It's split into two completely different directions.
Right. The column breaks down the current market landscape, and it's wild how fragmented it is. Like cassettes and mini discs. They're pretty much relegated to retro DIY culture, underground punk scenes, and archiving. It's a very niche hobby.
Very niche, yeah.
And CDs are surviving, but primarily as luxury deluxe editions for hardcore collectors who want the massive physical booklets and the guarantee of uncompressed audio. And vinyl. Vinyl is seeing a massive, sustained revival driven almost entirely by younger generations.
Which is so interesting.
Yeah, people who grew up on invisible, frictionless streaming are actually craving a physical object. They want the ritual of carefully dropping a needle.
We are seeing a profound cultural realization that absolute convenience isn't always the ultimate goal. People want the friction back. They want music to be an activity, not just background wallpaper. But while the physical market looks backward to the ritual, the digital market is attempting the biggest technological leap since the invention of stereo sound itself. We are moving headfirst into the era of spatial audio, specifically Dolby Atmos.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because for our entire lives, we've thought of recorded music as a binary. Left and right. Stereo.
Right, two channels.
Yeah. I want you to think about traditional stereo. Like watching a play from the front row, you have the left speaker and the right speaker. The band is up on stage in front of you. Maybe the guitarist steps to the left, the bassist steps to the right. But Dolby Atmos is like being invited onto the stage with the actors moving all around you, behind you, and even suspended from the ceiling above you.
It's a fundamental reimagining of how audio is engineered. The source explains that Atmos is an object-based 3D sound technology.
Object-based. How does that work?
Well, for decades, we've relied on channel-based audio. You route the vocal track to the center channel, the piano to the right channel. It's rigid. But with object-based audio, the engineer doesn't assign a sound to a speaker. They assign a sound to an X, Y, and Z coordinate in a virtual 3D space.
So they are literally mapping out a 3D blueprint inside the computer.
Yes, and the rendering engine calculates the physics. It introduces the height dimension. So a sound isn't just panning left to right. A producer can take a synthesizer swell and program it to soar from the bottom left corner of the room directly over your head to the top right corner.
But how does that work if I'm just wearing headphones?
The technology uses psychoacoustics. It manipulates how sound hits the complex folds of your outer ear to trick your brain into perceiving elevation, even if you're just wearing standard headphones.
That is mind-bending. You're not just listening to a track. You are stepping inside the architecture of the song. The music is happening to you.
And this is driving a massive industry shift. Platforms like Apple Music and Tidal are deeply integrating Atmos into their default streaming tiers. Sony is pushing their 360 reality audio.
It's everywhere now.
It is. We are moving away from the century-old paradigm of listening to a recording and shifting toward a spatial acoustic experience. It's designed to simulate the limitless, immersive feeling of being in the center of a concert hall.
It's just incredible to step back and look at this full trajectory. We started with the sheer physical friction of a diamond dragging through a vinyl trench, feeling the music as much as hearing it. We accepted pops, clicks, and tape hiss just for the privilege of carrying our music with us.
We really went through it all.
We did. Then we scrubbed all that analog dust away for the cold digital perfection of the CD, effectively mastering two-channel stereo. And now we're building invisible 3D architecture around our heads with spatial audio. Every single format hasn't just delivered music. The constraints and capabilities of the format literally dictated how artists recorded and how we emotionally connected when we hit play.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it raises a truly profound question about the future of nostalgia.
Oh, I like where this is going.
The article makes it clear that vinyl and cassettes are currently loved precisely because of their flaws. The hiss, the crackle, the warmth of the tracking distortion, those physical limitations are now prized as beautiful aesthetics. They feel uniquely human in a digital world.
Right, we missed the smudged window because it reminds us we're looking through glass.
Exactly that. But if Dolby Atmos and spatial audio represent absolute limitless immersion, if they become the perfect invisible window with no boundaries, no physical media, and no spatial limitations, what will the flaws of our current streaming era be?
That's a great question.
30 years from now, in the 2050s, when immersive 3D spatial audio is just how everything sounds, will audio purists be feeling nostalgic for the flat, two-channel stereo sound of the 2020s? Will they miss the simple feeling of music just sitting cleanly in front of them rather than swimming all around them?
Oh, wow. Are we going to see a hipster revival of standard wired earbuds because they sound authentically two-dimensional? Because they don't try to trick your brain? That is a wild thought.
It's definitely something to think about.
And it's exactly the kind of question that makes digging into the history of these everyday technologies so incredibly rewarding. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the history and future of sound. The very next time you put on your headphones or drop a needle on a record or press play in your car, I want you to listen closely. Try to hear the window you're looking through. Until next time, keep listening and keep questioning what you hear.